What's in a name? The name Israel, which means wrestles with God. People have fittingly wrestled and struggled with the meaning of this name and this passage for centuries. For a people in exile, separated from their home and heritage, and left asking the question, why, they likely found their question and situation echoed in the experience of their namesake ancestor millennia ago. As we've seen from the beginning of Genesis, through the stories of Abraham and Isaac, characters and readers alike are confronted with questions such as, why? Why would God do that? Why would God act this way or allow such a thing? Along with deeper questions of, who is this God who acts in such ways or asks such things? The stories of Genesis recall not just beginnings of the divine story, but God's grand story of his covenant and his people. But they also anticipate and reflect the later lessons and revelations which subsequent generations and people wrestled with. The themes and the focus of each character and their challenges are woven together in repeating stories and cycles. And these are like seeds, the cycles of which take root in the later passages of this text and the scriptures as a whole, as God faithfully unfolds his plan for redemption. Along the way, assumptions are challenged. Assumptions of who God is and how he works in the world. These are turned upside down as human actors called into faith through their encounters with this mysterious God who nonetheless speaks and is present with them. Over the course of Abraham's life, and though we given few details as to what happened, Isaac's life as well, they witnessed the fulfillment of God's numerous promises. And so also is Jacob's story. Like those of his forebears and his descendants, it represents a transformation of his encounter with God in both name and character. Now, the name Jacob means literally heel, but figuratively deceiver or supplanter. And this was bestowed on the younger of Isaac and Rebekah's twin sons, who was born grasping the heel of his older brother Esau, which foreshadowed Jacob trying to grasp blessing for himself throughout his life. The twin brothers could not be more different. Esau was a man of the wilderness, a skilled hunter. He was impulsive and the favorite of his father Isaac, while Jacob was more comfortable sitting in his tents, tending to the family's flock of sheep and goats. He was quiet and more calculating, and was the favored of their mother Rebekah. In the first recorded interaction of these brothers after their birth narrative, Jacob takes advantage of a famished and emotionally desperate Esau. Rather than simply and graciously offering him food for his brother was hungry, Jacob trades some stew for Esau's birthright, the double portion of their father's property that the firstborn was expected to inherit. Later, Jacob supplants his brother again, deceiving an aging father by taking advantage of Isaac's failing eyesight and his fondness for savory meats to receive the blessing that was intended for Esau. Distraught and enraged at being cheated twice, Esau consoles himself by planning to kill Jacob once their father dies of old age. Rebekah hears about this and so convinces Isaac to send Jacob away to her brother Laban's family in order to find a wife, but in also doing so, secretly escape from Esau's wrath. It is here that Jacob flees and finds himself alone. A man who is accustomed to sleeping in his family's tents is reduced to sleeping outside at night. A stone replaces the cushions of his youth, the stars replacing his favorite canopy. Behind him is an angry and vengeful brother, planning to take his life. Ahead is the uncertainty of a foreign land and what kind of reception his uncle Laban will give to a wayward Jacob. Subsequent readers of Jacob's story would likely recall the impending servitude that Jacob will endure in the years ahead. While Jacob has escaped death, he is about to enter years of exploitation in a less than friendly environment, as Laban deceives the deceiver, tricking Jacob into marrying both his daughters, that's how that happened, in exchange for tending his flocks, foregoing the usual wages of a hired laborer, and later again attempting to cheat Jacob out of fair compensation for further years of hard service. To an ancient people in exile, this point of the story likely felt like a minor reflection of their own, driven from their homeland in the land of promise, while being haunted by the taunts and curses of their enemies, including the Edomites, who were the descendants of Esau, and facing captivity and servitude in an unfamiliar and unfriendly empire. Yet it is also here that Jacob first encounters God. From a human perspective, Jacob is alone, isolated and vulnerable, until God reveals the truth to him in a dream. Far from being some desolate place, God stands beside Jacob over the link between heaven and earth, from which God's messengers, the angels, move to and from the earth. The dream reveals to Jacob this hidden mystery, that the God of his ancestors is in fact with him. The Lord of heaven identifies himself as the God of Abraham and Isaac. Growing up, Jacob would have heard the stories about this God whom his father and grandfather encountered and served. He would have watched as they worshipped the God who promised them blessings and descendants and possessions. And he would have learned about the covenants God made with Abraham and Isaac. Yet here and now, this same God spoke to Jacob and extended those same promises to him. To Jacob, with no land, no possessions, no wife and no children, no tent over him, not even a friend to welcome him into a home, with only a rock to rest his head upon, the God of his forebears promises to give him this very place where he currently sleeps like an outcast, but also so much more. God promises him land and possessions as far as the eye can see to him and to his descendants, who will spread out abroad in every direction. Remarkably, God tells Jacob, a man who thus far has sought to grasp at blessings for himself, that through him and his descendants, God will bless all the families of the earth. As different and mysterious as this reality of Jacob's lonely camp is from the gates of heaven, so is God's plan and purpose for his people that extends far beyond what can be seen, imagined, or grasped. Jacob is overcome by awe. He wakes up in a fright and responds in worship the only way he knows how. He offers what little he has, the stone beneath his head, and some oil to consecrate it as a monument, thereby displaying his trust that God will see his return to this place, and with it he makes the promise to tithe 1/10 of whatever God will give him in the future. God's appearance reassures Jacob that he is not alone, nor will he be forgotten. As long and difficult as the road ahead might be, the God who commands angels and reigns in heaven will be at his side to guard him and bring him back to his father's tent, not fleeing for his life like a thief, but as a faithful servant who is richly blessed. And God is true to his word. He watches over Jacob for the next 20 years, as Jacob marries Leah and Rachel, and 11 sons and at least one daughter are born to him during that time. God continues to appear to Jacob in dreams, guiding his life, keeping his uncle Laban from extorting the success that Jacob has with tending his sheep and breeding his goats, and delivering Jacob from harm when, out of desperation, he secretly flees from his uncle out of fear. God protects Jacob and ensures peace between him and Laban. With one adversary appeased and overcome, Jacob prepares as he returns to the land of Canaan for his next encounter with his estranged brother Esau. Surely, Esau must still be bitter about Jacob's prior treatment of him. For upon sending messengers ahead to greet his brother, Jacob learns that Esau is coming with a company of 400 men. Fearful that Esau plans to capture his family and flocks, he devises a series of plans, splitting his company into separate camps so that some might escape should the others be attacked, and also sending ahead large gifts of livestock to hopefully mollify his brother's temper. Esau's actual reception is quite amicable, and the twin brothers are reconciled, God being gracious to both of them. However, Jacob's greatest struggle occurs beforehand. The night before meeting Esau, having sent everyone else ahead of him, Jacob is once again alone, but then not alone. A mysterious adversary wrestles with Jacob all night. While neither is able to overcome the other after hours of struggle, the unidentified assailant is able to dislocate Jacob's hip merely by touching it, hinting at his true nature. Weakened and crippled, Jacob has no choice but to cling to his opponent for support. Yet true to his character, he also refuses to let go until he receives more blessings for himself. Jacob is asked his name, to which he replies, Jacob, and in so doing, he subtly confesses that he has lived as one who has deceived and supplanted all his life. But no longer. Now he is blessed with a new name, Israel, he who strives with God, and whose name will soon describe God's covenant people. The man disappears without revealing his own name, but as dawn breaks, Jacob perceives that it was God who he was struggling with all night. The Lord of heaven, who appeared to him in dreams and protected him for the last 20 years, came to him in gracious weakness under the cover of night. And with a new name and walking with a perpetual limp as a reminder, Jacob finally learns that true blessing comes from holding on to God rather than something one attains for themselves. Later readers, such as the Jews returning from exile, would likely find themselves walking in Jacob's footsteps. Like their forefather, the nation of Israel frequently sought to attain blessing through human means, in alliances with empires and armies, in trading wealth and resources acquired dishonestly and often at the expense of their own people, forsaking the covenant relationship with God, who promised to protect and provide for his people if only they would cling to him for blessing and trust in God rather than in human power. The puzzling encounter Jacob has with God, like others in Genesis, presents us with unanswered questions, such as Jacob's question in trying to learn God's name. Although he is able to determine who he met, such a question is left unanswered until it is asked generations later by Moses. God reveals his name, Yahweh, abbreviated as I am, but not before revealing to Moses that he himself is the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and telling Moses that he is likewise, I am with you, thus highlighting a connection between these two stories. Commentators on Jacob's wrestling with God have noted echoes with other stories, such as the story of Saul, soon to be known as Paul, on the Damascus Road. Surrounded by a blinding light and hearing a voice from heaven, he asks who is speaking to him, to which the Lord replies, I am Jesus. Perhaps in the days afterwards, temporarily blinded rather than permanently limping, Saul thought about how Israel unknowingly struggled with God. And perhaps he thought, as many have since, that if God was willing to show up in apparent weakness to meet with Jacob, he was also willing to come in true human weakness to hang and die on a cross. Perhaps Saul realized that, as many have since, that in order for all the families and nations of the earth to be blessed in Jacob, then the power of sin and death and the curse of human striving against one another, of divisions, exploitations, and violence first needed to be overcome. And if the history and story of Israel, from Genesis through the prophets to the exile, along with all the other nations, is any indication, that is something which only God himself can accomplish. While there are many threads in this passage and many promises that take root, one thing is constant, that through Jesus we share in Jacob's blessing, and that like with Jacob, God is also with us.
in our pain, our blue, our beautiful, our hard, our messy, our ugly, our struggles and our joys. God is with us. God accompanying us. God alongside us. God amid us. God among us. God beside us. God by us. God including us. God near us. God plus us. God upon us. God as companion to us. God side by side us. God in the thick of us. In the thick of our humanity. In the middle of this weary world. God is with us. In the gift and in the muck and mire of real life, we are called to be present, to be in the flesh with one another, accompanying others, alongside others, amid others, beside others, by others, for others, including others, near others, a companion to others, side by side with others, in the thick of others. God with us with others. God with the world in the thick of the beautiful and the messy. In that, a weary world rejoices.
The psalmist writes, "The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge." And the Lord Jesus says, "Remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. Go in peace."